I'd like to welcome everybody to the Committee of the Whole.
I think everybody's in the wine out there.
Yeah. Once again, to our audience, we are, yes, it's a different meeting than normal, but we are going to start, please. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and it's the opportunity from council to approve the agenda. First, before we get to that point, I'd like to recognize that we are on the unceded traditional territory of the Hupatchisitt and Sachot First Nation. And before we move to approval of the agenda, I'd like to recognize the presence of Freeman of the City, Donna Brett.
Thank you.
Council, a motion to approve the agenda is distributed.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Mayor.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you. And council as well, we have the minutes from Committee of the Whole meeting held at 4 p.m. on October 16th, 2017. A motion to adopt those minutes would be in order.
And I'll make that motion, Mr. Mayor.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Council, for this Committee of the Whole meeting, we are going to be looking at two items off the bat. The first one is looking at the options for the bike pathways on Stamp Avenue. And then the next one that we're considering is a strategy to address big city problems that are emerging but not brand new to the city of Port Alberni, particularly in this area of Southport. And then we're going to take a break at around 5 o'clock for an hour, bring in some dinner for us, and then we have a third item we're going to look at starting at 6 o'clock, delegation from the Alberni Valley Heritage Commission. So we expect to finish by 7 o'clock this evening. All right, so the first item is from the Director of Development Services, City Engineer, Stamp Avenue Pathway.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is somewhat of an update of a project that the city had planned, and it was we had budgeted $200,000 for a separated multi-use pathway on both sides of Stamp Avenue between Redford and Rogers Street, and then on one side of Rogers Street from Stamp to Millstone Park. $100,000 of that $200,000 budget was a grant from BC or Bike BC for this project. So even though this was in the budget, the agreement with Bike BC wasn't actually signed until August 24th. They were delayed in getting the agreements out, and it was to be completed by March 30th of 2018, and wanted to let you know kind of where we are. So when we started working on the detailed design of the original option of this project, it became it became clear that once we got out there and looked at the available right-of-way, we had costs began to escalate, especially given there was quite a number of hydro poles with guide wires, traffic sign, large trees, hydrants that all of a sudden escalated the cost quite rapidly, and it soon got over to an estimate of $1 million to try and do the original project of a completely behind the curb separated bike path on both sides of Stamp Avenue over that portion. So obviously didn't want to get very far on that, so started looking at other potential options. One potential sub-option of that was to potentially increase, most of those heavy costs are on the west side of Stamp Avenue. We do have some drawings that we could bring up if council wanted to look into it a little bit further, and I could show some examples of where some of the issues became aware. One of the sub options potentially would be to just do the east side of that. Certainly wouldn't be exactly what we had originally envisioned. Would need to go back and talk to Bike BC to see whether they would continue to fund the project. It would be an improvement. Wouldn't resolve some of the issues around the intersection of Rogers and Stamp Avenue, which is a difficult intersection right now, and it wouldn't resolve that problem. That was part of the reason why the bike path was originally proposed on both sides, to try and resolve that issue. Kind of a second option that we looked at is where it was possible to have it completely separated and behind the curb, and where other areas allowed, it would come out onto the current paved roadway, and be separated with, safety barriers. Again, that also started to get bordering over the $200,000 budget, and it would seem to be not certainly wouldn't be. We thought it was inconvenient for the cyclists, and would be potentially confusing and a bit of a safety issue for drivers when you've got the bike path partially behind the curb and partially on paved surface in some of the turning lanes and those kinds of things. A third, so both of those are not recommended, mainly because of the budget issues, but also on the second issue because we just feel it's probably a bit of a safety issue and not really meeting the needs of cyclists. A third option would be to essentially eliminate a vehicle lane and use that space gained to put in a separated bike path. This is a significant change to the original proposal, and certainly a significant traffic change in the community. So, would need to have some serious consideration before we went down there. We haven't done any design work on what that would potentially look like, because we really wanted it to come. Given the challenges we face, we felt it was very necessary to come to council and the community before we proceeded with anything else. Kind of a fourth option that kind of came out there when we were looking at is pretty different from the other three, and that would be a new route that would kind of run parallel to the railroad track, from starting on Stamp, crossing Rogers, and then go down and across a pedestrian bridge that already exists and exit onto Pemberton. Another possible option there. Again, we've done some preliminary design work, but not full design work on that. The third and the fourth option, even though we haven't done the detailed design, we do feel that those could be done within the $200,000 budget. Both are a change from what we had talked about with Bike BC. So prior to, again, proceeding with any details and based on input of council and the public, we'd need to talk to them about whether the grant would still be valid, or whether they would amend it, or whether they would withdraw it. So again, this is kind of where we're at. There are members of Alberni Cycle in the community, or in the audience, to potentially give some input, and I'd be pleased to answer questions as we go through.
You want to comment on option 5?
Which one was that?
On the screen. East side, just the east side.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I thought that was my sub-option that I got off track of, where again, yeah. No, so this is just on the east side behind the curb. There's already an existing paved surface there. It's not wide enough to be a full multi-use trail, but you could just add width to it. That could be done within the budget. Again, it's different than what we had originally proposed. We would want to talk to the grantor about that. It doesn't resolve, it's an improvement. Doesn't resolve the full issue around, for cyclists, in my mind, the intersection of Rogers and Stamp, but certainly, would be something that could be considered. Again, if we did, also, I didn't mention it, but if we did want to pursue the route along the railway, we would certainly need to get in touch with and start discussions with Corridor Foundation is they own the majority of the land that we would be looking to potentially use.
What would the costs be like of that particular proposal? Because you'd be building a whole new trail parallel to that.
There's some options there. There's actually a portion of a second railway bed there, line there, that you know, with it's gravelled and based. Kind of depends what we wanted to do. We did not get into detailed design because we were just, as we were going, I'm saying, okay, we're getting farther off what was originally looked at and approved by council and the community and the grantor. So we wanted to bring this to a committee of the whole so we could have some discussion before we go too far. That may prove out to be just a good gravel surface potentially, or it could be paved. We would want to light it to make that people feel safe and comfortable along there. But because there's a good base along there, it may not be as expensive as we think, but we have not gone into detailed design work on this.
I'd be interested to, personally, I'm not speaking for the rest of council because we haven't talked about this, but I'd be interested to know what the cycle folks are thinking. That particular one, major red flags go up for me in terms of safety. It was only a few years ago, maybe 4 years ago, when we had an attack of a teenage girl on that. It almost resulted in her death. It was a miracle that she didn't die, but it was because she was, it was on that unsupervised section of the tracks.
Well, it's certainly why we think we would need to light that portion. People are using it now to a certain degree. So you're right, there's lots of things to consider and discuss about that, and we haven't gone too far down that road, but clearly it would have to be well lit in order to try and improve that the safety aspect of that prior to us wanting to encourage people to use it, right?
And what would be, let's suppose we looked at the enlarging or widening the sidewalk on the east side of Stamp Avenue. Presumably you would cross in the existing crosswalks there at Stamp and Roger Gertrude, and then what, come back again on the south side of Roger from Stamp down to the Millstone Park? Is that kind of what you're thinking about, or what are you thinking about in terms of the route?
Well, that's one of the weaknesses of that. That intersection is not great. So, and the Alberni cyclists can probably speak to this better than I can. But just see if it's going to let me zoom in. So this is a bit of a tricky intersection from a cyclist. So for instance, and again, cyclists could speak better to this, but from a pure cyclist commuting point of view, they may, around this part, exit on to and travel on in a normal lane like they would as if there wasn't a separated path. People who, and in my opinion, that would be cyclists who are experienced in driving in traffic and those kinds of things. Others, they would likely get off their bike and walk the crosswalks like they do. But you can see it's not an intersection that lends itself easily for a continued ride through that. It's one of the weaknesses of the one side, but it's something that could be done. It would be an improvement, and certainly more affordable than, I'm afraid, than the both sides option.
And that sidewalk, does it continue on all the way down to Victoria Quay?
Yes. But you need to know that's okay for pedestrians,
Right.
but cyclists are not supposed to be riding on the sidewalk.
I realize that, but that might be able to be enlarged as well.
It's a bit tight, but
I'm just wondering about options. Anyway,
Yep, fair
I'd be
enough.
really curious to see what cycle folks think about those various options. Yeah, Ron, Councillor Paulson.
Just once again, looking at the options, and I mean, this is obviously budgetary driven as well. You gotta live within your means. And once again, I'd like to hear from the cyclists in the crowd, how they view that particular intersection. And certainly I'm wondering if we did the east side, if there's a solution to get from the east side of Stamp Avenue to the south side of Roger Street, where you can continue on with the path into Millstone Park and those sorts of things. And right now, that, once you get into that island that you're pointing at,
Yeah.
there's really no designated way to get from that island to the island on the left in a safe manner.
There isn't. So that's the struggle with this intersection.
'Cause
And
it
it
would
was
have-
one of the main reasons why
Yeah.
the whole west side was wanting to be looked at, because you're right, there's, in my mind, it'd be very difficult to create something here that would be safe.
Could you crosswalk it and pedestrian light it?
Yeah, you're gonna have to be really careful because of sight lines coming along here, you know, this curve.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, certainly something could be looked at. You'd want to get someone who has more expertise in this than I, but this is very difficult to create a safe.
Well, it's high use, that's for sure.
Well, that's the other thing. You
Yeah.
have a lot of traffic here coming at a pretty good clip on occasion.
Yeah. Councillor McLennan.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I wish I had a bit more time to look this over, and just getting this, I've been down, spending a fair bit of time looking over the situation as is listed here. No matter what we do, Roger and Stamp is a dangerous intersection for cyclists. And especially the cyclists that aren't sure if they're cyclists or pedestrians, and jump off the bike, don't look, walk across the crosswalk, may or may not be on the crosswalk or somewhere nearby to get the other side of the road. I drive there a lot, and I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room that does, because that's pretty well the main intersection anywhere you're going. And I'm thinking, and after I've read this over and the money and so on, we've already got a plan that you brought up, Mr. Mayor, when you first got elected, and we all still like it. It just hasn't gone far yet because of finances. And that's a pathway, a trail of some sort from Harbor Key out to the McLean Mill in that neighborhood. And I'm thinking that I've always thought that the only smart part of the bike lanes that we came up with, quite frankly, was this divided one here on Stamp Avenue. I think most of our painted lanes are quite dangerous. Not all, but most. And I've read other cities that have taken these type out and put other kinds in, and I'm not saying I know which is right, but if we did the east side now, when the people who are riding a bike get to that intersection, yep, they're gonna have to get off their bike and walk across a crosswalk, or as someone said, cut off and ride in traffic like we used to when we rode our bikes. I don't know how we survived so long, even when I didn't have brakes on them and things like that. But, you know, that was a long time ago. Maybe traffic wasn't as heavy, whatever. But, and then that would solve it for this point. And then keep in mind that we want that other trail probably going on the west side of Stamp. It's going to cost a lot more money, but we're looking for bigger grants then. Not just the Bike BC grant, but the heritage grants, the trail grants, and then we can go both sides. But I think for now, my opinion is, unless someone convinces me different, that we should go on the east side for now, expand that. There's one spot there I'm just looking at, I'm not sure how we're going to make it much wider, where the high tension tower is, right there on the road. But we are allowed, as a city, to pass a bylaw designating that cyclists can use sidewalks if they're a certain width. Now that's, you know, okay, that's sharing the road, that's sharing the sidewalk, and a lot of places do that. It happens in some areas in Vancouver as well. So we can do that for the trip down, if they go across Stamp and Roger down to Millstone Park, and if they wish to go that way. So, yeah, we can do that on that sidewalk that you were mentioning. So that's what I'm thinking makes a bit of sense. Like I say, I've spent a bit of time this weekend and today looking at it. And I just wish we maybe if we could get some of this information earlier another time, we could come up with some other ideas, but let's hear what others have to say.
Okay,
just
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I always like this topic because I always end up agreeing with Jack, which doesn't happen enough. So this is good. From a safety perspective, I totally agree. The painted bike lanes that we have are dangerous in spots, and the natural progression has been towards these protected and separated places. I think it would be great and zero cost nearly to be able to actually officially designate the east side of Stamp as a bike and pedestrian route. It already is, in effect. People are riding up and down there all the time. It would be good for that to be official so that, people couldn't say, oh, they shouldn't be on the sidewalk. Well, maybe they should be. But if we do that, we do need to make sure that they have an ability to get off the sidewalk and get on the sidewalk, both at Roger and at Redford. So I think that would be good no matter what we end up doing. I think it is important that we try to keep to the original spirit of the direction, which was to try to figure out a solution for the west side of Stamp. Maybe $200,000 isn't enough to do it perfectly, but I think it's enough to start. And I walked down there with my son actually on the weekend, and it was pouring rain, but I dragged him along anyway. And there's no doubt the north side there, closest to Roger, it's tight. It's really, really tight on the curb. You'd either have to mow down a whole bunch of trees and get rid of fire hydrants and hydro poles and all manner of things. And obviously that's where the cost comes in. But there is a ton of room on the roadway, a ton of room on that north section of Stamp. And as much as, it's great that folks can go around that corner from Roger onto Stamp, we've had 2 logging trucks flip over there, spilling load across. We've had a lot of accidents there, and there's a lot of accidents on Roger. So I don't think it's part of this project, but looking at that intersection is something that probably we as a city need to do, because there are serious safety concerns there, and I think there are probably ICBC grants or who knows what to fix it. But I do think it's worth looking at it. Maybe it's something that we need to bring out to the public and lay out the options. It'd be good to see if there's drawings today. That'd be great to see. But lay out some of the options for the west side. And what can we do on the street? I'm not entirely convinced that we would have to lose a lane. Certainly not on the north side. We would lose the turning lane down into Catalyst, but not the traveling lane, I don't think necessarily. After the tracks down on the bottom of Stamp, that's where it gets tighter for vehicle traffic. So I think that would be where the real decision would have to be. Do we get back onto the curb after that and try to do something different, or what happens after that? But I think there's opportunities here, and even if it means maybe we can get Bike BC to delay the grant by 6 months or a year, so that we can have a really good public discussion about what does that west side look like.
Anybody else on council? Okay, Councillor Sauvé first, and then Councillor Paulson.
I just hope this doesn't turn out to be a vicious circle as into what we're going to be doing with our bike lanes in our community. I already have concerns about how we addressed our bike lanes in the community and the places that I went to, but we're going through phases, and if I understand it right, we had matching grant of 100,000, was 50,000, Scott, was I right for the grant?
No, it's 100,000 from the
100,000
city and 100,000 from
That's right,
from the
with
grant.
the matching grant and so forth, and we're working on 2 phases of plan. I will not and will never be in agreement that cycling should be shared on a sidewalk with pedestrians, for the only reason that that's for the safety of pedestrians and children that are on the sidewalks. Now, the thing is, we have 2 elements in this community. We have the responsible cyclists and we have the non-responsible cyclists. And I could tell you that the responsible cyclists are in a minority in this community. I might have disagreement with people as into how many actual cyclists we have in our community. Does it warrant us having to reconstruct a whole roadway to satisfy, minority of law-abiding cyclists? I'm not sure. But I know this community needs to start realizing that we gotta live within our own means and what we have budgeted. And that budget, I would not be in favor of extending the grant because I know, and when you start talking about the intersection, especially Stamp and Roger, you're talking way more money. And I'm not experienced with this, but I know when it comes to the lighting, controlling the intersection, I'm more worried about the pedestrian crossing than I am about the cyclist, any cyclist crossing. We have the one right across the mill for the pedestrian one that's never been really recognized by the public, and a lot of pedestrians are having issues. I'm sorry, I'm old school. I believe you drive your bike on the side of the road. We've been doing it for decades and decades, and people would just get off their bikes and use their crosswalk. I believe that I would not go see the taxpayers into trying to extend something that there's much more priority in our infrastructure in this city. But I just wanted to mention my comments. I just want to make sure that council, I know it's a great idea. I support the cyclist community and so forth, but also I got to answer to some taxpayers who have much bigger priorities in this community. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councilor Paulson.
I just wanted to keep my thoughts again on the east side option, and I think the east side option, really, we weren't talking about sharing that sidewalk with pedestrians. We're talking about going wider. And I mean, the vision that I have is anybody who's walked the waterfront in Vancouver can see the pedestrian and the cycling side by side, clearly delineated and clearly marked. And at least that is the most dangerous stretch of road for a cyclist that we have in this city. Absolutely the worst. And I can't see us putting cyclists out into a lane. I mean, you're probably going to have to put concrete barriers and stuff to close off a lane to make it safe. I think at that point in time, you're choking traffic, the actual traffic flow. And it is the largest traffic corridor that we have in Port Alberni. It really is. And anyway, it might be short term. When you go across that crosswalk and then as a bike pedestrian or a bike or a cyclist, go through the lights. As soon as you get through the lights there, the road is clearly marked for shared bike lanes going straight north through Stamp Avenue. My biggest concern is that stretch from Redford to Roger, making it safe for a cyclist to transit. And I've passed cyclists on that road, and I've been in a group of 6 cars using both lanes, and it went with a cyclist on the curbside. And every time, I tell you, I just wind up with my heart, my throat going through there. So that may be the option, and maybe there comes a day in the future where we can go both sides. But I think if we can provide a safe corridor from the Barclay Hotel to the Redford in a widened roadway.
Are you referring to a widened sidewalk?
Yeah, a widened sidewalk, or, sorry, roadway I said.
Okay.
But anyway, that's just my take on it. It's not for the faint of heart if you're on a bicycle, right?
So, Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've not ridden on Stamp Avenue for at least 8 years, so I'm dying to know what Charles and Lee would have
Yeah.
to say about it before we start passing judgment on something that we know as a driver, but we don't know as a cyclist. So I'd just like to hear what they'd have to say. Maybe they've got something that we're missing completely.
Let's invite whoever from the council, from the cycling group who would like to sit at the table here and join us and talk about it. So how about Bill and Charles and Lee and Ian and whoever else wants to come forward to... So we'd love to know what your opinion is of these 5 options, and if you've got maybe suggestions for how something could be changed to accommodate some of these issues.
If I could just start, thanks for having us, and thanks for that great discussion. Everybody who's spoken so far, I really appreciate your comments. I'm just getting over a cold, so I don't know how long I can talk. My voice is kind of shaky. Sort of going down from sort of the perfect layout where it would be divided bike lanes on both sides would be the safest way to go.
So, sorry, Bill, is your mic on?
Yeah, I think so. Can you hear me?
It'll show green if it's on.
Green.
Okay.
Yeah, my voice is just not so good. The purpose of divided bike lanes is to enable bike traffic in a sort of a predictable and consistent fashion, so that we don't have to watch out for the bad cyclists that Councillor Sauvé mentioned. And the process of putting bike lanes in, from my view, and in most every jurisdiction where they've been put in, just the process of putting the bike lanes there and making them available and having people get used to them actually creates safer cyclists. It increases cycling tremendously in every city that I've read about that's done it. And it creates safer cyclists because it provides them with a roadmap, with a plan for how to ride. So that's part of the whole process. I agree, the minority of us out there right now, or the majority of cyclists that I see out there, are riding unsafely. It drives me crazy to be riding in a bike lane and I see a cyclist coming head on straight towards me, going the wrong way on the wrong side of the road. Sometimes I tell them to get over. Yeah. So considering the options, as I say, the idea would be, I think everybody would agree, protected bike lanes on both sides of Stamp going both ways, easy access through the intersection in a really predictable way. I agree with Councillors McClellan and Alberni that perhaps a first step towards that is to start with a 2-lane divided, like it's a multi-use path, but we're not really mixing cyclists and pedestrians. They're, as Councillor Paulson said, it's clearly delineated on those paths where bikes go and where pedestrians go. So it's a multi-use path, and if we could have, a way to get off the lane to go through the intersection, or give cyclists the option of walking through the crosswalk, it's a kind of a they could have the option, the braver ones can get off and just cycle through the intersection the way we do now, and the others could walk through the crosswalk the way it's recommended in bike training manuals that you do that anyway. There's 3 ways to make a left turn at an intersection. It all depends on your comfort level. So that as a starting point to get people used to the idea of commuting north and south on that traffic lane, and perhaps further grants in the future can enable us to go wider on there. I agree with Councillor Alberni that there really is lots of room on that road, and I'd be interested to know what the actual traffic counts are. I know there's some really busy periods. I ride Stamp Avenue twice a day to work and back, and so I know there's some really busy times. But there's also times when it's pretty quiet on that road. So I'd be interested to know just how much use that road gets and whether it justifies the 4 lanes. Before my voice runs out, I'd just like to mention that I think John Maba sent a link to a video. It's a pretty short video. It's on protected bike lanes. And if we could have that video played, and the things they say, the narration in the video is interesting and informative, but if you could take a look in particular at the different sort of technologies and the different formats for protected bike lanes. You know, it really isn't one size fits all. There's a different format for bike lanes depending on the needs of the traffic in the city, wherever you're building them. And there's some really innovative ideas out there for how you to do it. So I would encourage staff and council to have a look at all the different methods there are of doing it. There's not just one way.
So can we see that, please?
The way we choose to move around our cities is changing.
Deep down inside, most folks just want the freedom of choice. Where they live, where they work, where they eat, and how they get from one place to another.
Across the country, more people are choosing bicycles as a way to get around. Half of all trips Americans make are less than 4 miles, an easy distance to ride by bike. And bike commuting has increased by 53% since 2005. Cities are encouraging this trend by building a new kind of bike lane called a protected bike lane. Protected bike lanes are on-street lanes, which are separated from motorized traffic by curbs, planters, parked cars, or posts. Since 2011, the number of miles of protected bike lanes has doubled.
Protected bike lanes are the solution that makes riding on a street like riding on a trail.
So it makes biking an attractive option for a much wider range of people.
These projects are about livability, they're about economic success, they're about building community, they're about community happiness.
This is just part of a continuing effort to make Memphis a better city, a more livable city, to attract the type of young people and to keep the type of young people that we need.
Having these protected bike lanes improves the quality of life in our city, improves our economic competitiveness, and it allows us to draw employees, employers, and entrepreneurs.
People come here and they're always really refreshed. They see people out riding their bikes, they see protected bike lanes, and they understand that we're part of the modern world.
Protected bike lanes not only make it easier for people to get to a place, but they can help put a "You Are Here" stamp on a neighborhood. They can make it a place that you want to go to and be in rather than a place that you're moving through.
Obviously, as a business owner, I was a little bit nervous. I was like, okay, let's see how this goes. And I think that there's a major shift happening right now with this project. It's a real missed opportunity, if we don't embrace that.
I think protected bicycle lanes, the real value of them is that they benefit everybody, and it's not about serving cyclists.
What we're trying to do is order the streets so that they're easier for everybody to use, and so that they're predictable, and so that they're comfortable, and so that they're safe.
On these busy streets, if you create a separated, protected place for bikes, drivers know where to expect bicyclists.
We've seen speeds of cars come down, we've seen the number of bicyclists go up, and we made it easier to cross the street for pedestrians.
A study in New York showed that protected bike lanes reduce traffic crashes for all road users by 34%.
When you get a protected lane, you see like families and grandmas and people who are just getting around. It's not like this crazy, dangerous, insane thing to do. It's just how you travel.
It's even more important to me to continue to advocate and push for more bike lanes and more bike infrastructure so that my daughter and I have safe places to ride.
In a recent study, 96% of people say protected bike lanes make them feel safer on the street.
If they could build more of them, I think more families would go out and get bikes and go out and enjoy it and say, hey, look, we can get to school faster that way, and it's safe, and we feel comfortable, and I don't feel like unsecure of getting on the road with my kids and worrying about them.
They open up the street to people who might not otherwise feel like they belong there. That green paint to me is like saying this is a space for you and you're supposed to feel safe in it.
The more people that choose to ride bicycles, the better the quality of life is going to be in your city, period.
The People for Bikes Green Lane Project is helping U.S. cities build better bike lanes. Learn more and join the movement to improve bicycling at peopleforbikes.org.
Thank you for that. Charles and Lee, how are you feeling about these options?
From all the conversation that's happened,
thank you for all the different input. I think most of the conversation is towards doing the east side, which I think is a really good first step. For me, riding on the street, actually the west side is the one I find more dangerous to ride on, where I've been almost hit a couple times, just being pinched with the people coming off of Roger onto Stamp Avenue. I've been between two logging trucks there a couple times, and that's when it gets scary for me. But I don't think that we have the budget to try and tackle just the west side. I think that starting on the east side is a really good place to start, and if I were to ride on it, it would need to have a really easy way to get on and off of it. So, because I'm not gonna go and deal with the crosswalk, and I'll just keep riding on the road if it's not very smooth transitions.
Certainly our original concept was to essentially tie the path on top of on the dike through to the paths that we have in Southport. And so ultimately using a bike you could get from Harbor Key to McLean's Mill. That was the long-term, and that continues to be the long-term vision. Obviously there's a lot of money involved and a lot of time and a lot of effort, a lot of thinking, but within the city limits, this is the missing piece. How do we join 3rd Avenue to Victoria Quay? And so it was never really part of our thinking to have a separate bike path along that section of the railway and therefore potentially avoiding whatever pleasure people get from seeing the river and seeing the Millstone Park and all the rest of that kind of infrastructure. And when people ride, I think many people ride for pleasure as much as for moving from one place to another. And one of the things that gives us pleasure is seeing flowers, seeing the water, seeing that sort of thing. So that was our vision, that was our concept, and how do we make that happen? And for me, a separated bike path along the railway tracks has two issues. One is the unknown cost combined with the safety, but I think even more importantly, again, this is just for me, it'd move us away from that vision. Because I want people to be able to see that new Millstone Park that we're developing, no matter whether you walk or run or ride, and be able to see the water. That's what people love, to see the water wherever they are, whether it's freshwater or saltwater. People find it attractive. So, yeah, I tend to lean towards what you're saying, except I still worry about that intersection at Stamp and Roger and Gertrude. We still have to be able to get people from the east side to the west side in an efficient, safe, smooth way. Councillor Paulson.
Just a question of the three of you sitting there. I'd like to get your feedback on that intersection. Just how you think it can need to be improved, or what's the dilemma there? Because I don't cycle that, but I mean that intersection presents some ugly options for me, and I'm just curious, as you look at that, is there something that can be done there that can be changed, or if you don't have an answer for that, you don't have to answer it now.
I can say one thing for me is having it so that cars and trucks especially, turning quickly along that Stamp section. So if there was a way to slow them down so they couldn't actually just get the 60, 70 kilometer an hour speeds up going around that corner, because it's a single lane coming south. So that's where I find it's a pinch point. Going north, there's not really a pinch point. There's good visibility, but it's coming south, which is, and so if maybe they had to come and they had to actually turn the corner like they do on the other side of Roger, if they were coming down Roger, turning right onto Gertrude Street, they have to actually make the turn. There's not actually a turn lane. Maybe if they were forced to do that turn, that could slow the traffic and minimize the concerns there for myself. I don't know if you have something to add, Bill.
I bet you in terms of, you talked about 60, 70 kilometers an hour. I bet you it's the rare person that actually drives only 50 on there.
Yeah.
It's seen
Yeah.
somewhat as a bit of a freeway between Roger and Redford.
Yeah, I concur with that because I've run elbow to tire with logging trucks almost on a daily basis there too, and I'd love to see more enforcement on that stretch of road myself. Just the way that the big trucks especially just fly along there as if they were on a freeway, and it's dangerous for not just bikes but for cars too. And you know, I think I know from traffic statistics this is probably the most dangerous intersection in the city. Have I got that correct? More accidents or close to it?
It's probably second. I think Gertrude and Johnson is number one.
Okay, yeah, probably. So it's a challenging intersection for all of us, and there's no real easy, cheap solutions for bikes either. If money was no object, there are some really great plans, some really great kind of templates for protected intersections for cyclists. And what they do, I guess if I could describe it without pictures, is you take the pedestrian crosswalks, set them back a bit, and build a parallel bike crosswalk there. But the cyclists, is this microphone even working? The cyclists don't get off and walk through. It's a cyclist riding lane, but it's parallel to the crosswalk. And there's a little bit of a curb on each of the four corners where the cyclists go. And the cyclist stop line is ahead of the cars, and they have a separate light. So it's kind of like the Cadillac of intersections. But the concept of it is that you're taking the bikes and making them as visible as possible. You're making the bike lane as visible as possible, and kind of through the main dangerous part of the intersection, you're putting them a little bit out of the way. You're offsetting them a little bit out of the main traffic lane, and then once they're through the intersection, they're back aligned with the main traffic. Flow. And like I say, there's lots of innovative sort of one step at a time ways of accomplishing these things. And, you know, I think with a little bit of research, we could probably do some minor realignments on this intersection. And like Charles said, slowing down, the logging trucks are typically coming up Roger and turning south on Stamp and flying along that corner really fast. And, you know, some kind of calming on their part before they hit there. I find myself sometimes racing them so that I get to the corner before they do. You know, when I'm coming up from Victoria Key up Roger, and then I'm turning south on Stamp, and if there's one of them coming up behind me, I just go as fast as I can to get onto the road before he does. Because they try. I had one of them round the corner of Victoria Key to Roger with me beside him. I was already in the intersection turning east on Victoria Key, and he decided to turn the corner beside me with a loaded truck. So some way we could calm them down would be a good thing too.
See, that particular section from Victoria Key to Stamp Avenue, it would be easy to have a separated bike path off of the road on that section.
Tons of room there, yeah.
But then you've got to get around the corner and onto Stamp Avenue.
Yeah. True. Well, you know, there's a big grassy section there. Until you actually get around the corner, then it's a bit more of a problem. But the actual up Roger and around the corner, there's a whole bunch of grass there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If I could, sorry, I don't want to take it over, but if I could just speak, Mayor, you talked about along the tracks again. I think a recreational riding route along the tracks all the way to the mill would be a great thing. It's different than enabling bike traffic on the road, than enabling bike transportation, but it is another way of moving bikes through the city. And if you've ever seen the bike lanes, you could just go to Google Maps and look at the bike lanes in Penticton. What they've done is they've got a whole bunch of off-road bike routes, I guess you would call, and they eventually line up with the old Kettle Valley line that goes out towards Naramata and over the mountain, which is a huge tourist draw there. And they've designed that very effectively over quite a few years, I think like over about 20 years. And you know, for the long term, I see our tracks being the same way. But as as a way of moving bikes from one end of town to the other, not that effective right now. I mean, for one thing, we've got, what do you do when you get to the tracks on Roger? You've got an unmarked crossing there right in the middle of Roger Street, and it's kind of difficult to cross. But for the long term, I'd see that as a great asset to the community to have a recreational trail along the lines of what Penticton does.
So you don't see that as an issue of safety along there if it was lit?
Oh yeah, well, I sort of wonder about the liability of putting bikes on a rail line. I mean, I don't know what the insurance companies and the operator of the rail line. I know the city has a relationship with Island Corridor, so maybe that's taken care of. But you know, there's all kinds of issues with that. But I guess the point I was trying to make is bikes as a means of transportation and bikes as on a recreational trail are kind of like two separate objectives, in my view. You know, it's almost a separate thing.
Yeah.
Both nice goals to aim for, but.
Councillor Minions.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if it's worth looking at doing a chunk of the west side, like maybe addressing that corner, like an off-road, just a small portion, if that's all we could afford for now, and then having that merge back onto the road, or if we should just be waiting until we can do the whole west side. Because I wonder if we could do something with the corner off-road and then still do some widening on the east side.
I guess depending on when council gives, you know, some direction about where we want to go, which we would bring forward to the December 11th meeting that we'd be asking is, we would look at, if for instance you wanted to look at the east side, we could see what can we accomplish with that budget, and if there was money left over, we could see what logical portion of the west side could be done safely within the existing budget that we have.
Councillor Alberni, then Councillor McClement.
Thank you. Couple things. Just to refresh my memory, was the original plan to go all the way to, you know, Victoria Quay, or was it just Stamp? I can't really remember.
I believe it was to wrap around to go to the Millstone Park area. Stop right
Yeah.
there, but on just the one side.
Yeah. Because I'm just thinking, because along the same lines as what Councillor Minion said, that portion along Roger is super simple, and it would actually be gorgeous to have a path along there. It's a beautiful spot. And thinking back to how we were you know, justifying it in the first place, was there is a lot of traffic coming along, bike traffic and pedestrian traffic, going between Highway 4 and 3rd Avenue. There's a stream of people going back and forth along that corridor, and how we could facilitate that. So, you know, if we could focus at least on the Roger Street portion, get that portion of the off-street path done, and come up with the best solution we can with, you know, what to do with them once they're on Stamp, because even having the path, you know, where the signs are there on the corner, at least that would get you out of that lane with, you know, 70-kilometer-an-hour logging trucks coming along beside you. So it'd be a matter of being able to get you back into the roadway safely without freaking them out as well, because it's all about, you know, how do you make it safer for everyone? How do you make it more predictable for everyone, not just bicyclists or pedestrians, but everybody? So maybe we can do that Roger portion, and then you know, have a longer process to figure out what the end goal is for Stamp and what it will look like. Just briefly on the rail trail idea, I think, you know, similar to what Bill said, you know, it's two different issues. You know, recreational path, you know, kind of a dike path concept. You know, it would be fantastic to be able to have a path as good as the dike that went all the way from Harbor Quay all the way up to the mill, or at least all the way up to Compton. You know, the city limits. I would personally put it on the other side of the tracks, only because that would be where the pedestrians would be coming in, you know, from the 6th Avenue area, from the Echo area, and that. But that's kind of a whole other ball of wax. But certainly something to look at in the long term. There would be a lot to gain there.
Councillor McClellan.
Yeah, it'd be all well and good, I think, to do Rogers Street, and maybe that's just the only thing to do. I don't know, but if a cyclist is heading south on Gertrude to Stamp, they still got that intersection there across, and no matter what you do over there, it's not going to make it good. I used to ride my bike to work right through there, and I know it was a different intersection then. It's been changed several times since the last time I did it, but you know, you get to that corner and you know, what am I going to do next? And you just work on what the traffic is. You either get off, walk across, or wait for the light. Usually going south, you can wait for the light and go. But that other road wasn't quite as active, and you weren't dumping logging trucks out through there, because in those days, logging trucks are coming off-road and coming straight to the mills or whatever, off the road, not on the road. So that was a difference.
Okay, Council, I'm not sure if you have more that you want us to consider. Council, we've kind of gone through this a number of times. We need to consider a suggested motion there to bring this topic to our December 11th. So I'm just trying to get this wrapped up so we can go on to our next item. Councillor Paulson.
For me right now, and in my discussion, I'm very concerned about getting something done in the near and immediate future. And I don't know how we form this into motion, but I would like to see what the option is for an expanded bike path on the east side. And at least we can get somebody from Redford to Stamp in a safe manner. I keep looking back at that video and I see mom and dad with 2 little kids on a bike. At least it gets them onto a bike path safely. When they get to the Barclay, it is a controlled light. There's crosswalks there for a family. I'm just really concerned about getting that section of road done and getting it done soon.
So, Council, because it's
talking east side,
because it is committee of the whole, we don't actually have to make a decision about where to place this right now, but we do need to make a decision about whether or not to bring it forth to the December 11th meeting. CAO?
Mr. Mayor, to follow on what you're saying, this is committee of the whole, and so as committee of the whole, you can make a recommendation to council. And if you were to make a recommendation and staff sees what that clear recommendation is, I don't think you need to bring it back to council unless it's you're recommending to council to make a change in prior direction. So if you're just indicating your preference on one of those 5 options, then staff would take that as indication of council's desire, and we'd move to the next phase there and bring that back to council at a later date. So right now, it would be helpful to have a recommendation to council.
Okay. Well,
that's in the form of a motion.
If that's your motion, I would.
That's my recommendation.
Your recommendation, okay.
Is the east side option. And certainly I'm sure that there's many things that we need to check into that. In particular is the grant application and whether or not it would still hold true there or not. But it's an option that holds true, I think, probably, hopefully, within the budgetary restraints there, and at least in the short term gets us into some sort of a safe transit for bikes from Redford to Stamp. So that's my recommendation. Could we look into the east side option, double wide?
Okay. Is there a seconder for that recommendation?
Yeah, I'll agree with it if I'm not seconding it as a motion, but yep, whatever you call it, I'll do that. And the other thing I'd like to just comment on it is March next year, this has to be done if we're going to get that grant.
Right.
We're not much time.
Councillor Minions.
I don't completely agree. I would like to look into the west side option just to be different. Well, no, I don't think that's not what I heard. But I think that there is an option to do possibly a chunk of the west side as a priority if that's the more dangerous side, and then look at doing the east side with whatever's left over. I don't think we should be making a decision on this today. I think we should be getting a rough idea of options from staff and considering it more fully when we have those options. I don't feel like we really have, we're just talking about ideas. We're not really.
Just a recommendation.
Okay, but we don't really have any information to go off of right now.
And Councillor Soe.
No, I agree with Councillor Minions. I would like just to make a motion to have staff to come back with several options in consideration, so we could just look at everybody's avenue. Well, we got 5, but we're all discussing what money we want to spend for the rest of the bill on a certain east side, west side, whatever side. To me, it's what's best. I would like to see consultation with the police in the traffic section, but I just want to be able to give staff, especially Scott, some direction as into who to involve in these, looking into these options.
CAO.
Mr. Mayor, as a matter of process, you have a motion, Councillor Paulson's motion, and the motion is that this committee of the whole recommend to council what was moved. And so you would need a seconder to consider that.
And what I'm hearing is, and we do have a seconder for that. Councillor McClellan is willing to second that. But what I'm hearing is that council is saying we want to stick with Stamp Avenue, and we're looking to come back with what are the comparative costs between east side, west side, and does it make sense to lose part of one of our traffic lanes on the west side in order to achieve that on the west side?
Mr. Mayor, if I could follow up on that. So one of our engineering technologists told us that Stamp Avenue is essentially a low-heat highway. We've got a commuter highway in the middle of our city, and it's built to move vehicles quickly. And there's a lot of asphalt there. And so one of the reasonable considerations would be to use some of that asphalt, rather than putting more asphalt into the ground, use some of the existing asphalt for a separated lane, if that is a priority for us. And that would probably mean, by option 4, I believe, option 3, sorry, that we would lose one of the vehicle lanes in one direction or the other. So this conversation is helpful to staff to know if there's a tolerance among council for us to bring back a proposal that involves taking away one of the vehicle lanes. And if that's a no-go, then let's not invest any more engineering time and effort into that. So we're wanting to gauge council's direction on what are some of these 5 options that are of tolerance to council.
Okay, so this is as clear as mud for you. I can understand that. And but one of the ones that we seem to be taking off the table at this point is the consideration of going along the railway tracks. And maybe that's something we work towards at some point in the future, but not as part of this deliberation. So then it seems to me that you've got a little bit of work to do to come back with some little bit firmer costs for the December the 11th, if that sort of works in terms of timing and still keeping the grant.
Mr. Mayor, because we're now considering changing the scope of work, we will have to go back to the grantor anyway and ask for their approval of the change of scope, and we'll ask for an extension of that grant. So we're not likely to get the engineering work done and the build-out done in the wintertime by the March deadline. So we're already in a situation where we're going to have to go back and ask them to accept this change of scope of work and a timeline change.
So can you come back to us by December 11th with that information?
I don't think by December 11th, but we'll come back as quickly as...
No, I mean in terms of whether or not they would extend the grant.
We'll try.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then let's get that information, and then we can discuss it in more depth, and if we need to put it off after December 11th, we can do that. Councillor Alberni.
I think we have a motion on the floor to recommend the east side, which I don't think I could support just on its own. I think there's opportunity here. Well, if we want to kind of pare it down, so option 1 and option 2, I think council is pretty clear is pretty much off the table, except for Roger Street. There's possibility there to have the curb used. Option 4 is off the table, so that's good. So that's progress. So that leaves us with on the street, and I'm not entirely I'm not sure that we would have to lose a travel lane. And I think that's information that we would need to see from the engineering department. You know, if that road is at minimum 55 feet, and you know, travel lanes on highways are, let me just see. So travel lanes on highways are 3.5 meters. That's 14.5 meters wide total. That's 50 feet, 47 feet or so. If you're looking at a bike lane, you need 5 feet plus a little bit to get it protected. A bollard, you know, something small. So even at the narrowest, which I think is around 55 feet on that stretch, I think we could probably fit a protected lane in there. So all to say, I think our recommendation should be, you know, look at the lane options on the street and look at what the options are on the east side and see where we can put those together. If it turns out that there's, and you know, we need to involve the public and the cycling community and show them those options so that they have a good idea and we have a good idea what to do. If both of those are going to require us going back to the grantor anyway, then we're going to have that time, so we might as well use it. But I can't support the motion just to recommend on the east side. I think we need to look at both.
Yeah. Okay, so just some advice from you. Say, okay, within the committee of the whole, is it appropriate to vote on that motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it is. Just that the outcome of the motion would be a recommendation to council. So you wouldn't be directing staff to take action.
Right.
You would be making a recommendation to council. You know, it's right now you're not council, you're the committee of the whole.
Right.
So should the committee of the whole make a recommendation, that's good enough for staff to act on. You wouldn't necessarily have to bring it back at the next council meeting to direct staff. We could do the next step of work based on a recommendation from committee of the whole.
Okay,
so yeah, totally vote on motions, but the action you're imparting isn't a motion of council. It's a motion of committee of the whole, which effectively is a recommendation to council.
Okay, thank you. So we actually, council, we could vote on the motion that's proposed by Councillor Paulson. If we chose to defeat that, then replace it with one that basically says look at both options. So, Councillor Paulson.
I think we're seconded on my recommendation right now, so
I
just want to make a comment on it. I'm only going this route because I know that it's something we can get done.
Yeah.
We can get it done.
I get that.
Yeah, so that's my recommendation. If in the future, if we can do part of Rogers Street and stuff like that, I'm all for it under budget and stuff like that. But I'm more worried about getting something done rather than talking about it.
Okay, I'm going to call a motion, and all those in favor of the motion to look just at the east side option? Opposed? Defeated. So let's see if we are going to replace it with another consideration.
So I guess I'll make the motion to recommend that we look at both the west side on-street option with the extension to Rogers Street, and then any options on the east side as well.
Are you thinking exclusively on the street on the west side, or are you thinking sort of a combination of on the street and off the street?
No, option 3 is fully on the street. Yeah, except for Roger, but that doesn't apply to option 3 there. So, I'll be clear. Roger Street would be on the curb. That's not applied anywhere in these options here. Roger Street would be on the curb. Then we would take option 3. That stamp would be fully on the street, and then we would look at the east side options as well.
Okay, Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd much rather support a motion that says we'd start at the Millstone Park off the street, go around the corner off the street, and then hit the street when we run out of banking, for lack of better words. But when you run into your poles and your hydro and your fire hydrants, then take that lane that's been designed to let them merge on, and perhaps with that shortening that'll slow them coming off of Roger onto Stamp, because they can't just roar out there and stay in that lane until they get to the catalyst cutoff and then shuffle over.
I think we're speaking the same language. I don't think I have a second though. I do need a seconder though.
Okay. So then, on that motion, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right.
Now that we've confused the entire issue, what did we vote for?
You should have been listening.
CAO, what do you think you've been directed to do?
Mr. Mayor, the motion that I heard was an off-street path from Millstone Park along Roger, around the corner onto Stamp, and after the corner blending down onto the street, and then an on-street separated path from there to Redford. Is that correct?
I think so. Okay, thank you. All right, Council, let's move on to the next topic. And our next topic is not to do with bikes, but crime. So we have a significant increase in crime in the last, I don't know, 6 to 12 months in Southport, to the point where some people at least are feeling less comfortable about spending time, particularly as pedestrians walking around big chunks of Southport. So CAO, it's your report. How about you review that report for council?
Sure, Mr. Mayor, happy to. It's a bit of a long report, and excuse me, for those who haven't read it, I will summarize as we go through. I can start off by saying, in terms of background, council has been discussing some of the bylaw enforcement issues, some of the emerging issues in the community for some time. Recently at UBCM, council met with senior government and looked for some solutions to some of the challenges we face. And changes recently in the community have caused me to write this report to council, along with the support of a number of staff members. And if I can just summarize, hopefully quickly here. Again, a number of factors may indicate that the city is experiencing a growth in drug addiction and undesirable activities that are often associated with larger cities than Port Alberni. And some of those symptoms or factors, and this is not an exhaustive list, but recently we've seen 2 banks in the uptown area adding private security as a result of harassment of their customers, closure of business in the area. The city has been receiving complaints, which we haven't had in my time here, complaints from citizens saying they don't feel safe in our uptown area, and that there's been a noticeable change in the tone, if you like, of the uptown area. Recently, Inspector Hunter reported to council a spike in property and violent crimes in the city, but not a reduction, in fact, of crimes in the same categories outside of the city. Again, recently, the city's compliance staff, both our building inspector and our bylaw enforcement officer, reported to myself and the Director of Development Services that as they put it, their toolbox is empty for dealing with these emerging issues. And they took us for a walk around the uptown area and pointed out some of the challenges that are beyond their capacity to address. And they feel that these are an indication that the situation is going in the wrong direction. And the report lists, among those, bylaw violations, graffiti, non-maintenance of buildings, and non-compliant use of buildings, which often involves commercial buildings being used for multi-tenancy, low-rent accommodations that, in some cases, leave people living at risk. And as I said, council has recognized that some of these emerging factors, and you have discussed taking actions. So this report recommends some actions that the city can take. So some of these issues are beyond the scope of the city and beyond our mandate. So this report discusses what we can do. There's a list there of 7 action items in the council's status report. Some of those have been on our to-do list for a long time, and as you know, we're not getting to those. And council's been asking us to address these, and we just don't have the horses, the manpower, the staff to undertake these. The report uses the term big city problems to basically describe what might be called a socioeconomic dynamic that involves vulnerabilities of drug-addicted people, where some people are providing or gaining economically on those people in that environment. It brings negative impacts, certainly for those drug-addicted people, and it brings costs and negative impacts on business, residents, and the community at large. And some of those symptoms, if you like, of big city problems include people living at risk, theft of property, violent crime, substandard housing, some building owners or occupants adapting to this dynamic by intentionally utilizing business models targeted to profit from drug addiction, and other people, other than building owners, profiting from other people's drug addictions. I get that these are generalizing statements, and I should say as well, this isn't uniquely a Port Alberni problem. This is a problem faced by communities across North America. There are some unique Port Alberni aspects to this, though. Certainly drug addiction is not unique to Port Alberni. Insufficient leadership and action from senior government, not unique to Port Alberni. I don't mean to throw senior government under the bus, but mandates such as housing, courts, education, and health are obligations of senior government, not municipal government. And yet these are some of the things that are lacking in addressing these issues. There's also some holes, if you like, in our local government compliance and enforcement fabric. We have one bylaw enforcement resource, and we've been trying to not grow government, and clearly that one resource is under capacity, and we have to really consider bolstering that resource. Fairly unique to Port Alberni is an overabundance of commercial buildings. This community has seen a reduction in population, as I've told you in the past. If you layer that over top of the fact that we are two communities, Alberni and Port Alberni, that amalgamated, anticipating growth, which we didn't see, we have more commercial buildings than this community can support. And many of those buildings are not economically viable. And so they tend to, oftentimes, they tend to not be invested in and languish, and we're dealing with some of those and considering them as nuisance properties. And sometimes one of the only ways that building owners can turn a profit on these buildings is to use them for a purpose for which they were not intended. Port Alberni may be increasingly becoming a location that enables low rent tenancies, people living at risk, drug addiction, crimes driven by drug addiction. And if this trend was to continue, we could see more people living at greater risk, an increased frequency and severity of crimes, closures of more businesses, and a general degradation of quality of life throughout Port Alberni. This sounds doom and gloom, but I have to tell you that some of what I've been seeing and what's been reported to me has moved me to write this report. Council, you know that I support Council's fiscal restraint direction, and I still think that is managing our finances is of the utmost importance. But I am of the belief now that this problem is becoming big enough, and if we don't deal with it, it will become our number one problem. And I'm suggesting that we turn our minds to expending some resources on this. So I'm proposing, along with staff, a multi-pronged approach to help make Port Alberni a community that helps citizens address their drug addictions, and at the same time makes Port Alberni a non-desirable location for people who continue to live with addiction to drugs, and especially for the people who profit from or contribute unwittingly to some of these big city problems in Port Alberni. So I'm proposing 4 basic strategies. One is reducing drug addiction in Port Alberni. The second one is reduce theft of property crimes. And the third one is eliminate centers of crime. And the fourth one is support existing businesses. So I can walk through, Mr. Mayor, if you like, those one by one.
Sure.
First off, in reducing drug addiction in Port Alberni, primarily I would suggest that is a senior government responsibility, not a local government responsibility. But the city can certainly help with that by supporting agencies that are working in that area. And so in terms of action and costs, I'm recommending that the city can do this through advocacy, policy, and providing incentives for the development of safe housing and community-based support programs. And we can discuss estimated costs of that further in the, on this one, estimated costs are project-driven. So what I mean by that is there's not necessarily a budget increase attached here. That would be a project-by-project case. So if we had a specific initiative that we wanted to partner with an agency on, we might consider incurring a cost at that time. So that is, sorry if I wasn't clear, that is to help people recover from drug addiction. And at the same time as we are helping people recover, we need to make Port Alberni an undesirable location for people who are drug addicted and contributing to this dynamic. And it might seem hard-handed, but in some respects, by making Port Alberni an undesirable location for some of these folks that are challenged by this, that may also drive them to a decision or action to seek help. But our action and costs, I would suggest, are reducing opportunities for acquiring money through theft of property, reduce opportunities for low-cost housing that are substandard and unsafe. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't have low-cost housing, but we have some very substandard. Our building inspector refers to it as third-world housing, which is unsafe for the people living there. We need to eliminate havens of drug addiction lifestyle, and we'll address that in just a bit. So that's on reducing the drug addiction in Port Alberni. And every community is dealing with this and trying to deal with this. The second strategy, reduce theft of property crimes. First and foremost, community-based awareness and action programs like community policing, neighborhood watch, and other programs. And in terms of action and costs, supporting current and new programs, utilizing existing resources and new community-based volunteers. Expansion of resources beyond existing may be considered in specific cases. So again, I'm suggesting we use existing resources to leverage community-based volunteers. And if we need extra resources, we'll come back to council and have that conversation. The second one, second tactic, the city could provide a subsidy to property owners to encourage installation of security lighting, closed-circuit TV, and other engineering solutions to reduce property crime. I think that that we've been a small town and we've gotten in the habit of leaving our things not secured, doors unlocked, cars unlocked. And we've heard that from community policing recently, that a lot of the property crimes we're seeing are crimes of opportunity, people accessing property through unlocked doors. It would seem prudent that we would ask people to harden their properties against crime, and that we might incentivize that like we have in other programs, like the facade program, by providing some funding to folks who want to do that. And if we were going to provide funding to people to protect their private property, we could at the same time require they meet certain criteria. And we could work with the RCMP to determine what those criteria are. For example, if somebody wanted to access a grant program to install security cameras, we might also insist that they belong to a neighborhood watch or a block watch program, or that they do certain other things. And in that way, we could leverage our funds. And the report suggests that an estimated annual cost would be $25,000 per year. Recently, we've been asked to provide more street lighting and more crime prevention strategies to protect private property. And I would suggest that the private property owners need to be equal partners, at least equal partners in those initiatives. The third tactic, is target prolific offenders. And we know from Inspector Hunter that the sustained implementation of the RCMP's crime reduction strategy is a solution that will work. And the RCMP are working hard on that. And I would suggest that we continue to do that, bolstered with by law enforcement resources, cities' resources. We don't have enough resources right now to meet the needs of even our partner agencies like the RCMP. And a fourth tactic would be eliminate ready markets for stolen goods. So part of the equation of reducing property crimes is making it harder to steal it, and the other part is making it harder to sell it. So I would suggest that we utilize a multi-agency approach, including city resources like bylaw enforcement, building and fire inspections, and policing, to eliminate locations where stolen property might be resold, and support education programs that encourage citizens to identify their belongings before they're stolen, serial numbers, that sort of thing. And again, utilizing existing resources or resources that are accounted for elsewhere in this report. So the third strategy, eliminating centers of crime. If if you like, if you can picture a building, a commercial building that is being used for the wrong purposes, where there might be 10 or 20 or 30 people living in squalor conditions where they're at risk, and maybe a landlord or other people are preying on them, those types of areas become centers of crime. And I would suggest that some of our tactics would involve, for example, a multi-agency task force, again, to use all the tools available in a coordinated fashion to discourage building owners and occupants from activities that encourage big city problems. And so that would, for example, look like a city-led multi-agency task force that would include senior government agencies as well as local government, using existing resources or resources that we'll talk about shortly, working in conjunction with those agencies and senior government. Second tactic, develop a bylaw services department. And this is where the rubber meets the road for the city, really, quite frankly, that encompasses the ability to develop and implement and enforce the bylaws necessary to provide the city with the powers that are available through existing legislation. This will enable, for example, the usage of our nuisance building provision, our bylaw. We don't have the necessary staff resources, as you know, to undertake those things. And it means boots on the ground in terms of bylaw enforcement officers, but it also needs a manager to manage those functions. And currently we're asking the Director of Development Services, Scott Smith, to do that work, and he clearly doesn't have the time to do it. He's overtaxed at the moment with development permits that are critical to our success as well. So in terms of action and cost, I propose that the city develop a bylaw services department, not just a resource, not just one person. Develop that department by adding one additional enforcement officer, one manager, and a half-time support position, estimated an annual cost of $220,000 per year. Third tactic, develop a city function that can purchase and repurpose problem and strategic properties. So this is something we talked about a little bit in the past. We don't actually have a strategy to take possession of properties, to purchase properties. And as a result, it becomes a decision of council in the moment whether we want to make an offer on a piece of property or whether we want to sell a piece of property that's in our ownership, under our ownership. And so I'm suggesting that, especially given the overabundance of commercial properties and some of these properties that are a significant problem to us, that the city develop a function that with policy direction from council. So council would set the policy under which terms and conditions properties would be purchased, and then enable a staff level function, probably a small committee, to actually go out and purchase properties, and that we would start to acquire and hold these properties, maybe demolish buildings, maybe renovate, maybe rezone and turn them over to developers or owners who will use them for the purposes that are desirable to the city. It really is talking about putting our money where our mouth is and getting in the game of property ownership in a strategic way. And this will be a long-term approach. The outcomes will be seen over a long period of time, not short-term. And that's a topic that will require further discussion, I'm sure. Should we do that, we could utilize existing staff to do that. We could, for example, take the current land sale reserve funds and make those available to that function. And the city could council could enable the borrowing power to a certain amount to this committee to be able to borrow money to purchase lands. And it would mean that we would have to service that debt as well. So again, that's a topic that we would have to come back to and have further discussion. Probably all of these are. And under the fourth strategy, supporting existing businesses, the economic development manager, Pat Deacon's not here today. He wanted to be here, and he wanted to tell council that the way he puts it, he'd be quite happy to see a reduction in his budget to see action on some of these items, because he can't sell Port Alberni, he can't develop businesses when some of our current businesses are under attack, quite frankly. And so he sees a lot of value in this kind of hands-on approach. So the actions that are in this report effectively support businesses. What we'd like to do, well, we have some businesses, especially in the uptown area, who are islands among, you might see a successful business that is an island among vacant buildings or misused buildings. And what that business really needs is a cluster around it, some other successful businesses that they can feed off each other and to grow a healthy a healthy uptown. And currently, the buildings that are left in that, especially in the uptown area, we think are at risk to being driven out of that area, which can only be bad for the city as a whole. So looking at some of the estimated annual costs of this, and then I'll turn it over to council for questions. What we're proposing is a $25,000 per year program to assist property owners with engineered solutions for security, developing a bylaw services department for an estimated $220,000 per year. So an overall increase in expenditures of $245,000 per year. There would be a one-time cost to support the bylaw function of $70,000 a year. $70,000, I'm sorry. That would include a vehicle and some desks and computers and some reconfiguring some space in the building to support that. There's other costs that would be attached to, for example, the land purchasing function. We would have to consider what that looks like and come back with specific costs on that as we go. So, Mr. Mayor, that's my long report. Hopefully that made some sense, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Makes a lot of sense, and there's, everybody on council wants to have some say. Just for council's information, a couple things just to put it in perspective from my chair. I met this morning with our new resident judge and our temporary Crown Counsel. Fascinating conversation about what they see from their perspective. I was under the impression that we had quite a core of about up to a couple dozen people who are causing a lot of these problems, but they said, well, multiply that by 10. It's probably 200 to 250 that they see on a relatively regular basis, and they don't really see the court system as providing the solution, but they could see it as maybe part of a much bigger response. The other thing in terms of property purchase in Southport, again, sharing with council, we have looked very seriously at purchasing a number of properties in the uptown, and curiously, the owners of those properties are not interested in selling them, except in one case for absolutely an obscene amount of money. So at least at this particular point in time, buying those properties doesn't appear to be a real option for us as a city. So maybe that's not something that's necessary as a major consideration. I don't see this as a solution that is, it is not a simple one. It's only going to happen when a lot of agencies and a lot of people really work together in some process. It's long-term, you're turning things around, but it's taken a while to get to this point, but we're at that point and we can't ignore it. So I agree with that. Councillor McClement and then Councillor Sauvé, and then I saw a bunch of hands over here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I notice our time is starting to get towards the next event when another group of people are coming. But I went over this report and I was interested in listening to CAO's recommendations and just looking quickly on these status report things. I think number 35, 6, and 7, we could just take off and we could debate that on how we do it. It's just drones in the city that's already covered by the federal government. You're not allowed them anywhere in this town or anywhere in the valley by the rules they've got, so we don't have to worry about that. The other thing that I'm a bit concerned about, the purchase of property. We just heard the staff is overworked, but yet they're willing to take on another thing. So I think we should look at that. And the main concern I have about this whole situation is I don't see the RCMP here, and I don't see our bylaw inspector or enforcer rather, and I don't see the building inspector here, who are really people who we should be talking to and getting ideas from, in my opinion. I've done a lot of work on the bylaw side of it just by my own research. I really enjoyed the trip I had around with the bylaw officer, and I don't know, he did invite other councillors. I don't know if any of you went. Up to you, whatever. And about quite a few years back, the RCMP and us went down in Nanaimo, the Port Alberni, and discussed what they did with their problems on the streets, and they had worse than us, what we have now. I believe they had about at least as bad or worse then. And some of the solutions they had, and it was sort of working together, RCMP, the city council, the bylaw people, and now that we're able to charge the properties if we deem them nuisance properties, if we charge that property for attending, charge them for the RCMP coming, charge them for the bylaw coming, and building inspector, et cetera, we can put that on taxes, and some of the people might just decide they want to get rid of their property. It's going to cost them a lot of money. But we can't do it with 2 bits a time or $25 a time. It's got to be hundreds every time they go there. And if we can make that stick, and we can, I think that's the way we got to go. So that's all I'd like to say now, unless you're going to give us permission to ask a bunch of questions for the next hour and a half.
I'd like to try and wrap this up.
So I'll be polite then and let the next one go, because I got lots here.
Yeah, I know we all have.
Yeah.
Councillor Sauvé.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I first began my mandate after I retired from the RCMP, the mayor and I had a talk, and he asked me one task is to look into the town and the crimes and how we could prevent things, and give him mostly a monthly update we've been doing about the in and outs. The one thing, and I appreciate the CAO with the report that you made, and it makes a lot of sense. And I know you've gotten input by the police and all that. You worked with a lot of stakeholders. One thing that's been successful, my last term with the RCMP was as a crime analyst. I used to be for the provincial level for the Crime Reduction Initiative. And the Crime Reduction Initiative works great within the police station where they set priorities, and this is where you're going to hear things like prolific offenders and all that. I could tell you one thing, these absentee landlords that are holding buildings and allegations of drugs and all that, being fined is not going to solve the problem. I'll be honest with you, including dispensaries and everything. You want to do what you want to do. They have more money. They could just pay the fines and really run things. Where it comes out, and I think you hit it right on the spot, that I strongly believe that council should support, is a multi-agency, I call it the Crime Reduction Stakeholders Committee, to be involved. When I was in the force, we had a committee involved with the crime reduction, and it worked great. Why did it work great? Because you had multiple agencies working together. All these agencies actually shared information together. You'd be amazed about these prolific offenders and these drug dealers and so forth and all that. All is attached or associated with every one of these agencies, provincial, federal, and municipal. I think that having such a, I hate to call it task force because it's not enforcement, but having a stakeholders committee created is going to be crucial. This way, all these agencies could communicate with each other and all deal with the same goal. Now, putting these people in jail and all that, I'll be honest with you, we've been, the police have been very successful in putting people into jail, and but they're coming back into our community. And when we start realizing that we have to not only deal, but help with these people, the better it is. I strongly believe in enforcement, don't get me wrong, I still have that blood in me where these drug dealers needed to be taken out and dealt with by the justice system, and sooner the better. But the thing is, there's a role in the community that has to play. The police is just one part of the entity into helping a certain little, I call it a crime wave, but it's happening in every community. This is having the public involved. Recently, I put out big needing people, volunteers. We have a lot of projects that is actually sponsored by the city also. We are taking a role, such as Citizens on Patrol. We have Block Watch. And everybody's interested, but not a lot of people want to be part of the solution. And the solution is that we need to buy in with the community to actually help the police and turning things around and actually coming up as a witness, coming up as watching their neighborhoods and so forth. So all these programs are available. Every detachment has them, but they're only as successful as how many people participate. So having that requirement would be, let's be part of the solution as a community. let's embrace our police detachment or fire department or ambulance or mental health workers and work along into a plan and to extract these sores that I call them in our community. I see a lot of business people just simply saying, you know, why are they shutting down? It's because of crime. You know, a lot it's because now these days we have e-commerce, that a lot of stuff are being done through the internet, and I feel we're losing these businesses. But for me to say, and I'll stand up here and say it, having landowners actually buying up businesses and holding them for low rental and all that is not the solution, because you're just building yourself a hub in the community. That's why it's important to have this bylaw officer, and have a bylaw officer, a man or a woman, that's really into enforcing it to make sure they abide by the zoning laws that we have. You know, we got a commercial, that we're losing a commercial window in the uptown that we need to get back. So there's lots to be done, and I thank the CAO, but I really feel that having a crime reduction stakeholders committee is a start for the first step, and embracing all these programs that the police have to offer and involving the community to be part of the solution. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Washington, Alberni, and then Minions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just two questions for our CAO for when we do a follow-up meeting. I'd just like to know how many bylaw officers there are in other communities nearby. Just, I know we got one, but I mean, are there communities that got 4 or 10 or 2 or whatever? And second of all, at our first committee of the whole meeting, we had a presentation from Chamber of Commerce, and I'd like to know if the business license fees would actually support the salary of a second bylaw officer. That's it, sir.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Alberni?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So thank you to the CAO for the report. I think it was it's very comprehensive. It outlines it really well. It outlines the whole issue. So the enforcement aspect, I mean, yes, we can put in more resources into our bylaw enforcement. I think we should for a whole host of reasons, not just this specifically. And RCMP, need our support anytime they can. But I think the focus on the enforcement end is misplaced and isn't what is shown to actually work as far as ending homelessness and drug addiction and the crime that comes from that. If we could, as far as enforcement goes, if we could take the business owners, not the business owners, the building owners to court for the third world conditions that they impose on others, why isn't that illegal? Because it's terrible. We shouldn't be expending resources on the people who are living there and putting them in jail. We should be putting the people in jail who are forcing them into those situations. So to that end, I mean, we have an enforcement obligation, and that's sort of, as a city, that's our most direct way of doing things, and that's fine. But we need to enforce the laws and then ensure that the people who are affected by that, those who are addicted and the homeless, have a place to go after we've enforced the bylaws on the buildings and all of that. What I would like to see is, and I was really impressed and really happy to see the CAO's suggestion of the city buying land and repurposing it. We have an example in Terrace today. They announced that they have purchased land, and they will be, I'll just read it here. They have city-owned land that will be developed into 52 units of transitional housing. And that is the key to actually solve the crime problem. It's not to put them in jail or to find some other jail to put them into or find some other city to put them in jail to put them into. It's to solve the reason that they're using drugs and committing the crimes in the first place, and that's desperation. And that's what we have to solve as a city, and we can solve it. We have vacant land. We have a big chunk that's right there on Third Avenue that's supposed to have a 6-story apartment building on it. I'm sure that's not going to happen anytime soon. We could put transitional housing on it. BC Housing is offering, those container structures are to build housing easily, efficiently, safely, and then we could move the people out of the Arrow View and all of those places, take them out of those places, remove that revenue stream from those building owners, and put them into a place that's actually safe and has supportive housing.
I don't believe there are any people living in the Arrow View, but anyway, move on.
You know which one.
I hope not.
There's a few.
1 second, Mr. Douglas, we'll just let Harborview. Okay.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief because I want to just really echo everything that Councillor Alberni just said. That's basically what I was going to say, is that as much as enforcement is a very important piece of the puzzle for us, and something we have to do as a city, and I definitely support increasing our bylaw, and to a department might make a lot of sense. But I think we can't enforce away this problem. Mental health and addiction is not going to be solved by more policing, more bylaw, making sure people can't live in, shutting down the Carlson building, that kind of thing, because we can shut down maybe the 30 people living in the Carlson building, but something else will open up and we can put drug dealers in jail, but another drug dealer will come in. So we have to look at how we're going to help the people who are being harmed by this. So thank you to the CAO for bringing this forward. And the very first point here made in the strategy is to help citizens living with drug addiction who want to recover by advocating for community-based solutions. And I'd really like us to think more specifically about how we're going to actively engage outside agencies to start creating some real systems and programs. And we've got a lot going on in our community already, but how are we going to encourage more? How are we going to encourage partnerships where we can actually make a difference? And the biggest takeaway for me from UBCM this year was a focus on housing, and people living with mental health and addictions have the strongest chance of getting out of that cycle if they have stable housing. And we have a lot of groups in our community working on housing and working on more projects, but we have also a housing crisis and rental housing shortage, and we're really not moving at the pace that we need to for addressing the housing problem, especially at the low-end housing level. We're creating a lot of nice new housing, but we're not creating enough supportive housing. We're not creating enough affordable housing. So, if we're going to take these people out of the Carlson and Harborview and wherever else, we need to be actively thinking about where they're going to go. If not, we're really just shifting the problem.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Paulson?
Just
then,
a quick
Mr.
comment,
Douglas.
and I completely agree with Councillor Alberni and on the landlord situation, and to be quite frank, there's a number of predatory landlords in this community, and an example that came to me is charging rent at $700 for a unit. But this particular landlord is charging that $700 for every adult that's in that apartment. Could be 3 or 4 adults. That's what I call predatory and way over the line. I don't know how you, can bring jurisdiction against a landlord like that. But that's that's as bad as the worst drug dealer in town too, is the person that's predatory and taking advantage of those underprivileged people. And this is such a huge, multi-dimensional problem, and thank you, CAO, for your report. Where do you start? I'm not really sure, but maybe it's time to roll up the sleeves, and we may not have all the answers here as a council, but to your statement, it has to be multi-departmental. departmental too. I have a hard time with the larger cities downloading on smaller communities because smaller communities do not have the resources to deal with this, to be quite honest. And we've seen it since Expo. They've been downloading into our communities. Tell me how many of those faces are familiar. We used to know the people that were the alcoholics and stuff in this community, and there's just a monster number of new people in our community. So just a comment, and I'm not sure where we start, but maybe you can be the guide.
Okay, Mr. Douglas, you wanted to make a point.
Thank you. I wasn't quite sure about the formality of this.
We're not that formal, as you can see, but I'd sure love to have you come to a microphone so that people at home could maybe hear you.
Thank you. So I just wanted to really embrace what Councillor Sauvé just suggested. You know, this is a huge issue. It's been developing over many, many years, as all of you reflected on. And there's a number of contributing factors, including downloading, including housing, including criminalizing addictions and all the criminalities that people get involved in as a result of that. But I just wanted to embrace what Councillor Sauvé suggested, and I think it could be one real positive thing that could come out of this meeting today, which is to work towards a committee. You have 3 agencies that I've counted very quickly in this room, ACAUS, the Shelter Society, Canadian Mental Health Association, that provide a large amount of housing. They have a lot of expertise in housing. The sector of society they deal with involves many people who are involved in addictions, and because of that, quite often in criminal activities. And I think they would be a great resource for you to consider reaching out to consult with and get them to work together with us to try and do at least a little something we can do locally. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left before I call a recess, so I'm wondering if there's anybody else in the audience that wants to participate in this. Alan, do you want to come forward? Council, I'm not sure if everybody on council knows Alan Frood, Executive Director for ACAUS.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure exactly what I want to say because there's so much to say. I agree with Denise Sauvé's idea about bringing groups of people together, and John's comment about engaging the agencies that are already providing housing. I'm one of the people who complained about what it's like on 3rd Avenue, and I'm one of the people who talked about staff being afraid to park their car and come into the office. So there's an immediate need to address some of those things right on the street. Who knows what it is? Perhaps it's through street cops walking on the street. I have 3 staff members who have windows looking over 3rd Avenue. One of my staff members taking pictures of a number of drug deals that have taken place on the street. When I advised the RCMP of this, I was told to let the police do their business. So disappointing in that we could help and not. But I think my primary comment really relates to housing and the need for, in terms of social determinants of health. That's what we have to pay attention to right now. Greater than 46% of the people, renters living in Port Alberni, are paying greater than 30% of their income on housing. So if you can't house people safely and securely in a healthy environment, then you are going to have crime on your streets. You are going to have people taking those kinds of actions that are not legal. Tim, I want to say thank you very much for bringing this report forward, because I think it's a really, really important thing for the city to be talking about. And yes, I'm sitting beside Canadian Mental Health and the Shelter Society, and John, of course, from Phoenix House, and you know, we're all working with marginalized populations in different ways who are impacted, and the city has to step forward. On the housing front, I'm going to just stick on that one. I'm going to advocate, as I always have, to inclusionary zoning. When you have a new development coming in, anybody that's willing to develop and build, you should be looking at some kind of bylaw or requirement of developers to allow for a certain percentage of low-income housing units to be incorporated. You have a great big property down there where the old high school is, and lovely to see a development taking place. However, guess what? There's nothing to do with low-income housing in that, and there's no willingness to look at that at this particular point going forward. And pieces of that property are going to be left zoned institutional, which means who knows when it will be developed. So what we're talking about is 2 parcels of that land being developed and 2 larger pieces of that property not being developed, when there's a fabulous opportunity to do something in a great residential area. So I'm a housing advocate. I'm an advocate for low-income earners, people who have substance use problems. It's not just drugs, it's drugs and alcohol. And if you read the latest reports from the Health Network, you'll see that we even consume more alcohol here in Port Alberni than in other communities per capita. So lots of great information. But again, thanks for bringing it forward, and Council, thanks for your consideration of this report.
Okay, thank you. Council want to consider a recommendation to staff on this one? Or Councillor McClement?
Mr. Mayor, I'd recommend that to council or to staff, whoever we have to recommend to from here, that we have a committee of the whole meeting on just, this is the only subject. And when we do that, that we invite the RCMP, the bylaw, the building inspector, everybody that has to be involved, and any of the agencies, whatever. I got a lot of concerns. My wife tells me, she's worked on Lower Argyle since 1990. I don't know how many years I'd have to add it. And
almost 30.
Only in the last 6 months has she been afraid to go to work. So she doesn't work in a good building. And those of you that know which one it is, one of the worst ones on the street. But so that's the problem. The biggest problem I've got, and the biggest bear bug I got, is that we get, I know I shouldn't say it, but I'm gonna. The RCMP here is saying they're looking after repeat offenders. The repeat offenders they're looking after are people who have mental illness and drug addiction. They're not looking after the repeat offenders that are selling the damn drugs. I know that's a bad thing to say, and like someone was already told, let the police do their job. They're not doing it. Sorry. Anyway, that was my motion, that we have a meeting just like this.
Okay, I'll second that motion. Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, it is.
I was just going to suggest that I heard on the radio the RCMP member stating that there are 26 prolific offenders. If we know who these people are, why don't we print their pictures in the paper with their names so that their lives can be made unreasonable and they'll leave? If we're being downloaded on, is it fair to ask all of this city to absorb the cost of everyone else's cast-offs? That's not on. And if the RCMP doesn't want to cooperate with us, perhaps we'd like to consider our own police force. At $4 million a year, it's possible.
It's actually 6.2 million, but anyway.
Well, it's 6.2. I'm sure it's more than feasible. Matsqui, Abbotsford, Port Moody. I mean, I'm from the mainland. I tell you what, you don't mess around in Port Moody. Oh, no, you don't. Because that's a private police force that listens to council, not somebody back east that really doesn't have a clue what's going on here. All right?
Okay, thank you for your input. Okay, council, on that motion, all those in favor of that motion? Carried. Thank you. Okay, so there's some direction, and at this point, I'm going to declare a recess, so we'll come back at 6 o'clock.